We're going to be moving on now to this idea of a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. And these are two very different things, but one you may have, the other you might need to cultivate. So we'll see how it goes, and hopefully what we'll be doing is awakening your understanding to the kind of mindset you have. And it really is a matter of the mind. So there's a core distinction between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. A fixed mindset protects your current self, whereas a growth mindset builds on your future one, the future mindset that you want to have. So when you're fixed and your mind is rigid, you are unable, your ability is innate and largely unchangeable. Whatever's there is all that's ever going to be there. Effort is something that you need when talent runs out. You're not necessarily looking for new skills or looking for new understanding, and ultimately you avoid challenge and you're afraid to fail because you think that is a limit that you have on yourself. Whereas a growth mindset is an ability developed through sustained effort. It actually takes work to have a growth mindset. Effort is the mechanism of improvement, and failure only opens up an understanding of what you need to work on in order to eliminate more failure. So challenge is where development actually happens. So when we think about a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, we're actually talking about how we approach a challenge or an obstacle or something that needs to be overcome. So with our examples of kitchens, cooking, and history, the hands-on, the practical, the cooking world, and a little bit more academic, cerebral history world, let's look at what a fixed mindset looks like if you're in the world of cooking. You could say something like, I'm just not a good cook, and leave it at that. So if you're fixed in that what you're saying is, well, I don't have any instinct for it. Other people are naturally better at it. I've tried it. Nothing ever turns out right. It's more effort than it's worth. I could just buy food from the grocery store or from the restaurants. And whenever I follow recipes, it isn't really what I want anyway. So cooking just isn't really my thing. So what this means now in the practical world is that you are dependent on somebody else's food. You're dependent on processed food, and you end up with a self-learned helplessness is what you're after, is what you actually have. Health consequences might end up becoming compounded because you may not be eating well if you decide, well, cooking's just not my thing, it's bad, so I'm just going to grab whatever happens to be the nearest thing at hand. And it's a closed door to one of the most accessible forms of creative and cultural understanding. You've just locked yourself into, this is what I know, I'm sticking with it mentality. So this fixed mindset in the kitchen isn't just about missing out on an enjoyable hobby. It actually has direct consequences to all sorts of things. If you're 25 years old and you just flat out have decided that you can't cook, then you're undermining a lot of your future energy, health, and well-being. So you got to think. Now I'm going to harp a little bit about cooking. I like the film Ratatouille that Pixar put out because I agree with the chef in the first chef that died early on. Anybody can cook, and I think that's a reality. So moving on from there, the growth mindset in the kitchen would look like this. Let's say you are saying, I am going to be a cook. This is the goal that I'm after. Every skilled cook had to start somewhere. So starting with simple techniques and building deliberately on those will add layers of understanding to the right production of food. Treating a failed dish is something that you gain from because you analyze how it went wrong and then avoid that mistake and can teach other people how to avoid that mistake in the future. Reading about the science behind the technique is also helpful because that gives you the why or the deeper understanding. And also, you can learn how to connect food to your energy, to your mood, and to your long-term health. So the result is cooking from scratch, just getting a load of ingredients dumped on the table because it's faster and ultimately cheaper than eating out or buying somebody else's prepared food. The dietary quality improves, not through willpower, but through the capabilities that you are acquiring as you go. You are choosing to learn, but the blockage of I'm just not a good cook is gone. Now it's I want to learn, I want to grow, I want to be a success at this. Food becomes a lens for understanding agriculture, understanding culture in general, understanding history, understanding science. All of these aspects are involved in being a good cook. So when someone develops genuine cooking capability, they start eating healthy and they start becoming more active in the decisions they make about what goes into their body and then the outputs that they get from it. So that's a fundamental difference and more sustainable relationship with food, and it starts with believing that the skill is actually learnable. So what if you have a fixed mindset in regard to history now? I was never good at history. I was a poor student in it. It's just a bunch of boring dates. Who cares when all that stuff even happened? Well, if you say things like that, you're also saying, well, I'm not academic enough to understand it. You're also saying, well, that'll happen in the past. I got to get up and go to work tomorrow. Who cares about, when Winston Churchill did such and such? Current events are complicated and politically loaded, and they just don't make any sense. So what you end up with now is you have chosen this new way of living. Current events are impossible to contextualize without a historical framework. So you've blocked yourself off from fully understanding historical events because you will not understand you've blocked yourself off from current events because you're not choosing to understand the historical events. Political narratives go unchallenged. If you don't know the history and the background of the political worldview that you are adopting, then how do you know that you totally agree with where people are coming from? Are you just going to say, well, yeah, that person looks good on TV, so I'm going to accept their position? The feeling of being confused and overwhelmed by the news ultimately becomes permanent. You end up with just having emotional reactions and not informed reactions. That's the problem with having a fixed mindset regarding history. Now, you can apply these to all sorts of different things. Let's say we want to talk about religion, you could have a fixed mindset about religion to the exclusion of all others, and then just think other people with their religious views are weird. Well, there are logical reasons why other people have particular views, and so it's important to learn to understand those views and why people actually do have them, and then you can follow on with other questions and other understanding and other discussions later. So these things are all interrelated. When the examples we're giving here can be applied to lots of other things. So what about a growth mindset regarding history? Understanding where we are requires knowing how we got here. If you're driving down the highway and suddenly stop and say to yourself, how in the world did I get here? Nobody does that. You want to know where you've come from to know where you're going. So a growth mindset with history looks like approaching a confusing news story by asking, well, what happened in the background? Why did that person end up in that situation? What caused that event to take place? Reading one good book on a period and watching the present makes it more legible, becomes more realistic. Like, oh yeah, I read about the history of Iran. Now I understand what's happening in Iran. Following a single thread, following a war, following a political movement or a social movement, following the collapse, what led to the collapse of a society, see how it all connects up to where we are in our modern day. I remember spending some time learning about World War I and reading several books about World War I and suddenly realizing that World War II made a lot more sense once you understand World War I. Treating historical ignorance not as a personality trait, but as a gap that reading can close. So it's not that you're just not good at history, you just never saw the dynamic nature of it. And that could be true of all sorts of things. It's not that you're not good at English, it's just that you don't understand the beauty and the depth of well-crafted English language presentation through novels or something like that. So the rise of a populist movement in the 10s and 20s, if you don't understand where that came from, how are you going to understand the current, but more importantly, realizing that those movements and those trends came out of the 1930s. So immigration has a long history to it. Economics has a long history to it. A growth mindset towards history doesn't just make you more knowledgeable, it also makes you a more effective citizen today. And you're able to have informed conversations, not just emotional conversations. So the choices that we make every day, regardless of what avenue we go down in lifelong learning, it could be philosophy, it could be literature, it could be politics, it could be a practical skill of some kind, software engineering, coding, web development. There's all sorts of things that you can put your hand to, but you have to have the mindset to be always learning and growing in it. Even me making online courses, I had to overcome the challenges of not knowing in order to produce better and better courses. And even now, I'm not necessarily going to be 100% content with this course. I want to make a better one in the future. So mindset isn't a personality type. It's decisions that you make repeatedly, little decisions that we make constantly. If you have a fixed mindset and something is too hard, you stop. If you get it wrong, you just say, I'm not good at this. If you think it's outside your comfort zone, then you think it's just not for you. But if you have a growth mindset, then if you say it's too hard, you'll say, well, this is where I need to now spend more time making it easier. If you say, oh, I got that wrong, now I know I got information on how to do it differently to get it right next time. This is outside my comfort zone. Well, this is exactly where development happens. You have to overcome the frustration and the uncomfortableness of the not knowing. So either in a cooking world, a history world, a woodworking world, a sewing world, a learning about baseball, learning pickleball, learning a new card game, learning about philosophy, learning about medicine, any of those things, the mindset you bring to the difficulty determines everything that comes after it. Any field that you decide you want to learn about is going to hit you with a challenge of some kind. I'm currently reading through a series of books from a very specific list of books that I've chosen to read through. Some of them are easier than others, and some of them are harder than others. And I have to overcome and find ways to still glean out of those books what I want. So it's the choices I make every day. It's saying I am committed to this through the end of that little goal, of that little phase, of that little area of expertise, whatever it happens to be. It's ultimately a mindset that you choose to enact.